Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Low Budget Review Show. I am your host, Eric Smith, and today I am talking about Dead Man's Song by Jonathan Maberry. This is from Kensington Fiction. There you go. I don't know how clear that was. This is the second novel in the Pine Deep trilogy. I reviewed, I believe, the first one a few years ago, so there should be a link for that at the end of this video. But here we go, this big, thick book. Now, because I record a bunch of these at the same time, basically every Saturday, I take whatever I've finished since the previous Saturday and record all my reviews, which is why you see me in the same t-shirt. Everything looks the same for a bunch of videos. And so sometimes I'm thinking in terms of I'm thinking that everybody's going to see these videos right in a row, which I know isn't the case. But this is the first book that I finished for my October read for 2021. So if I make mention of anything else that doesn't make sense, it's just because I'm thinking in terms of all of the things I finished in the previous week. Because it's all, everything that I finished for October, for my October read. At the beginning of the month, there are a couple of things that don't count. But everything else takes place on or around Halloween. And that includes this. Someone relatively recently commented on my video for the first book, which is Ghost Road Blues. So I did review it. And they asked if I had read the other two. I had not, so I figured, hey, let's read them this year. Finish out the trilogy. That's neither here nor there as far as this book is concerned, except there is no introduction or anything that tells you what happened in the previous book. But within the first few chapters or so, as we're reintroduced to the characters, basically their reminiscences, their introductions do tell us the events of the previous book. Thank goodness, because I did not remember much of any of it. So we do get that. And so Pine Deep is the, what do they call it? Not the hauntedest. That doesn't make sense. That's a horrible word. Most haunted, but I swear they use one word, but most haunted city in America. They're big on Halloween. They always have haunted hayride and huge attractions and all this stuff. And it's a farming community, and so they make money from their farms, but then the big money comes in at Halloween. It's a huge tourist attraction. Well, in the previous book, some bad stuff went down. I'm going to try not to spoil too much of it in case you haven't read that one. But this psychopathic killer and two accomplices are on the run, and they crash into Pine Deep, and they cause all sorts of hell. And we learn 30 years ago there was this massacre, and this guy, the sort of itinerant worker, blues player, that the kids in town would call the Bone Man, he stopped the killings. He killed the killer, but the town thought, or certain people in the town thought, that he was the killer, so they killed him and strung him up like a scarecrow. So this Ruger guy crashes into town. This evil from 30 years ago has reawakened. The ghost of the Bone Man has come into town. So there's all sorts of craziness going on. And our main characters are Crow, who's a former cop, alcoholic, not drinking, who owns a store that sells comics and books and Halloween stuff, spooky stuff. And his girlfriend, Val Guthrie, who is the daughter of Henry Guthrie, who has the most prominent farm in town. We have Terry Wolfe, the mayor. Saul Weinstock is the head of the local hospital and the ME, and a bunch of other characters, Vic Wingate and Tow Truck Eddie, Mike Sweeney, this kid, all sorts of characters. So after everything that happened in the first book, we start immediately with the second book with, man, like I said, I don't want to spoil the first one if you haven't read it, but a bunch of characters are in the hospital. A bunch of characters are dead. And a bunch are in the hospital following the events of just the previous book, but literally the previous night. The forces of evil are getting stronger. Our heroes are figuring out that things might not be so normal in Pine Deep. Excuse me. Man, how do I do this without spoiling anything? Terror happens. This book only covers a couple of weeks, maybe, in the middle of October. And the heroes, our heroes, Crow, Val, Saul, Mike, this reporter, Newton. I don't remember his full name off the top of my head. I really like this character. I believe he's just introduced in this second book. I don't remember him from the first one. And I like my expectations for this character were not met. And I mean that in a good way. But they're figuring things out. They're realizing, again, that there might be something unnatural going on. And the forces of evil are building their power, consolidating their hold on Pine Deep. And this is all going to lead to what's called the Red Wave. Of course, all of this, it's all leading up to the big ending in the third book, which I am in the middle of. Not quite the middle. It's a huge book. So it's Jonathan Maberry. His writing is fantastic. He's got a great style. He really builds the characters, and the characters are fantastically fleshed out. I love Crow and Newton and Saul, and I hate the characters that I'm supposed to hate. And it's a huge epic. I mean, if you put all three books together, it's got to be 1,500 pages at least. This one is 400. Well, that's actually all right. 466 pages, so just under 500. The next one, I'm not going to show it to you, is, holy moly, 536 pages. And then I don't remember how much the first one is, but so we're talking close to 1,500 pages for the total thing. So this is on the level of The Stand or Swan Song by Robert McCammon. Of course, those are the first two big epics to come to mind. But whereas those books cover the country, everything here takes place in Pine Deep. It's a huge sweeping epic that takes place in this little town. And it's amazing. I'm pretty sure I gave this 5 out of 5 on Goodreads. I did have a couple of problems with it. Now, with reviews, and especially mine, of course, it's always opinion. So there's a couple things that bothered me that may not bother other people. Otherwise, this would have been like a 6 out of 5. Because the story's fantastic, the characters are fantastic. Just a couple of things that bothered me. One was there's a bit of repetitiveness in the storytelling. Now, I assume that is to immerse the reader deeper into the story. But just as an example, Mike Sweeney, the kid, is having nightmares. And it felt to me that far too often the nightmares were described over and over again. Every time he had a nightmare, we get a description of, and they're the same nightmares. That's the thing. So, whereas, and I'm not dictating how anyone should write, but, it could have just said, and Mike was having the same nightmare that he'd had all week, but it literally will describe it again. And I think there's a few other things, not just the nightmares, where we're getting the same information over and over again. And neither one of these two things that bother me, that's the first one, are deal breakers in any way. Obviously, I gave it 5 out of 5. But the other thing is something that bothers me in books, movies, TV shows, and that's basically that Saul Weinstock keeps telling Crow that they need to talk and then never telling him what he has to tell him. It's got to be half a dozen times that he calls him and says, we need to talk, but I can't tell you over the phone. Let's meet up. And then they don't meet up, or, something gets in the way. And so he'll call him again, or Crow will call Saul about something, and Saul will answer whatever Crow's questions are, but then he says, we really need to talk, but not over the phone. Let's meet up. And then at one point, when they do meet up at a certain event that I'm not going to go into, and they're standing there, and we need to talk, but not now. And so I found that annoying. But that's I hate when that happens in anything. But those are basically my only two nitpicks of the book. It's so well written, with such wonderful characters, both good and bad. Such a sweeping, epic story. We're following a lot of people. So, yeah, 5 out of 5. I'm keeping this one relatively short because I feel like I can't go too much into it without giving away the first book, giving away some of the wonderful things that happen. And by wonderful, I mean well-written and entertaining, not necessarily good things, because there are some wonderfully bad things as well. But I don't want to give anything away. Absolutely take the time to read at least the first 2. I haven't finished this third one yet. So far, it's been fantastic. But there you have it, I guess. That's Dead Man's Song by Jonathan Maberry, second book in the Pine Deep trilogy. Highly recommended. There is an introduction by Jonathan Maberry, and I think he says this is standalone. Like, you could read any of these by themselves, but I completely disagree. Technically you can, because you're given the information you need. As I said, over the course of the first few chapters, you are given the backstory of stuff that happened in the first book. But why you would want to, technically you can read any book and just read that book. But I don't think of it, I wouldn't consider this standalone at all. And I think it's completely open-ended, which would mean it's not standalone. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Dead Man's Song, Jonathan Maberry, 5 out of 5. Fantastic book. Let's see. Question for this video. Do you like epic stories? Do you like a story that takes 1,000 pages to tell? Whether it's The Stand, which is just one big book, or even Under the Dome, although that's less epic. It's huge, but I wouldn't think of it as like a sweeping epic story. But say The Stand, Swan Song. How do you feel about books of that size? And again, see, this is sort of where it comes into the whole, I'm recording a bunch of stuff at the same time. The next 3 books that I'm going to be reviewing are all novellas. Well, one's a small short story collection. They're all very small books. Because, just for you folks, if I went straight from this to the third book in the Pine Deep trilogy, you would have had at least a week with no reviews, possibly more. So in between, I read a couple really quick things so that I'd have time to finish the third book, but still have reviews for you fine folks out there. But anyway, giant books, big epics. Again, whether it's standalone like the Stand or Swan Song, or a trilogy like this, a true 3 books that all make up one giant story that you really need to read together. What are your thoughts on that? Do you like giant books, giant stories, or do you prefer, 200-300 pages or even less? What are your thoughts? Obviously, I shouldn't say obviously. I don't mind if it's well told. Excuse me. Initially, I was going to read one of these every Halloween for 3 Halloweens in a row, but that fell apart after the first one for some reason. I don't remember why I didn't pick these up the next year. And then I just decided to read these 2 this year just to finish. Plus, I didn't want to forget what was in this one before I got to the third one. But once I finished this, I could have easily gone into the other one. But again, wanted to have more reviews for you folks. The Stand, I just read that for the first time last year at the start of the pandemic, and I, relatively speaking, flew through that. I seem to recall, I read Swan Song a long time ago, but I recall flying through that. Under the Dome was quick. So I don't have a problem with this, as long as it's compelling, well written. That's just like any book, though. But I guess when you're talking 1,000 pages, you really need interesting characters, compelling story to keep you interested for that long. So again, if it's well done, I have no problem with it. Sometimes I'd go so far as to say I enjoy every once in a while having that huge tome to read. What are your thoughts on that? Or do you prefer smaller stuff? Let me know in the comments below. And speaking of comments, if you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put them in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here at the Low Budget Review Show. Please like, share, and subscribe. I should emphasize share. But please like, share, and subscribe. If you'd care to follow me on any other social media, my Twitter is @Ronin5757. My Instagram, where I post pictures of books, comic books, board games, and fuzzy animals, is Eric Smith 5757. That's Eric with a K, ERIKSMITH 5757. That's all I've got for you. This has been the Low Budget Review Show. I have been Eric Smith. And until next time, read more books.